record. Burn it down is right, as it seems to be that the fantasy landscape was burned down over the weekend. You are right here with us with another episode of Woo Fantasy, right here on the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. I am your host, the Roto Superstar Brandon Murkison, alongside my co-host, Mr. Nick Heffley. How are we doing this evening, sir?
Awesome, man. Awesome. We got football next week.
We do have football coming up. We're just 1 week away from NFL Week 1 action finally kicking off. Week 1 next Thursday night. And I'm not sure that we can contain our excitement. It's finally here. Still have to work. Darn baseball.
That time of year, man.
Yeah, it is that time of year for the Braves to do their annual disappointment for the fans as we approach the playoff season.
No, not that time yet. No,
That's October. That is October. We're getting there. It's fast approaching. I mean, yeah, if you're anything like me, once fantasy football season really gets rounded into shape and takes off, baseball falls by the wayside. But of course, Nick, he can't seem to do that. He has a job working in baseball. He still loves baseball. Well, it's full-fledged fantasy football time, and that's what we're here to talk about, getting you ready for the fantasy football season. We're continuing our fantasy previews with the NFC South this week. But let's kick things off and talk about what I made reference to already, the burning down of the fantasy landscape over the weekend. And if you had any drafts this past weekend, like I know myself and Nick did, we had our long-standing Hampton Cup draft this weekend, the auction style draft. We had that on Saturday, wrapped that puppy up, and head down the road, and lo and behold, injuries and retirements galore right after the draft. Of course, Andrew Luck just announces his retirement from the game of football 1 week away from the Colts season starting up, gets booed off the field at the Colts preseason game, and then has a little bit of an emotional retirement speech post-game. How are you feeling about the circumstances surrounding Andrew Luck's retirement?
Yeah, I think Colts fans, they understand the why. I think for them, they came so close last year. The defense is looking up. The offense is looking up. They're thinking they've got a great year and have a chance to win a Super Bowl, and then Andrew Luck pulls this. So I think from their disappointment, it's more of like that close.
Yeah.
For me, thank goodness I did not draft Andrew Luck in the leagues outside of a draft that actually been later in that night after that we did the handshake draft. I did have Carson Wentz as a late keeper. Andrew Luck fell into like the 10th round, just on a value pick. I was like, I've got to pick him up, right? And it probably wasn't an hour late. Talked up his a little disappointing, but it definitely did not spend $29.
$26. Mr. Tim Hampton in our auction draft spent $26 at the quarterback position, which is of course it was a $250 cap in this league, not your standard $200 auction value, which you do see a lot out there in the auction draft. So yeah, you had a little bit of extra change to spend. So yeah, $26 on Andrew Luck down the tubes.
It was a year. Andrew Luck started to fall, and I really wanted him to go early into drafts, and thank goodness he did. Otherwise, I would have called
Yeah, he was the guy last year to have. That's true. Coming back off the injury, he showed out last year, and I obviously finished as a top 5 quarterback in fantasy last year, and we were excited about the possibilities of what that offense could do this year. Now, here, what are we left with?
Yeah, I mean, he was my number 2 rated quarterback coming in this year. Obviously this was before the injury questions started to pop in. I think he went down to about the number 7 or 8 guy.
Yep.
On the board after that. So for me, this literally takes everybody down a notch in that entire offense. 100%.
Which I was going to say, let's get into that. Now, of course, the first option in the passing game, of course, is T.Y. Hilton. A lot of people had him as a fringe wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2. Where's his value now dinged at? Where are you dropping him down on the board? Of course, a lot of drafts are already kind of come and gone. But where do you see his value lying right now with the Luck injury news, or with the retirement? Not good.
That's not good. He was easily. I think I'd had him as my number 8 ranked wide receiver before the Luck injury news. He was coming off 14 towards that middle of the late part of round 2. I'm not going to be comfortable getting him until about round 5. I think is where his value should be going. We've seen the experiment last time Andrew Luck got hurt with Jacoby Brissett throwing the ball. Was it good? He had a couple good weeks, but overall, his value would take a major hit. So, I won't feel comfortable driving him until about right around the 5th round.
Yeah, I mean, that's with me. I had a rankings update that I did put out just yesterday. I dropped T.Y. Hilton all the way down to 21 in my wide receiver rankings. I had him, I believe, at 13 before the retirement. And so there was, that's a precipitous drop for him right now. But ADP-wise for T.Y. Hilton, it's not really adjusted itself just too much yet. He's still 14 at the wide receiver position in current ADP data, and right there at the tail end of round 3, over at 36th overall. So I think you're still that seems to be an overpay as things currently stand right now with T.Y. Hilton, with Jacoby Brissett as the quarterback for this Colts team. And what did we see out of Jacoby Brissett just 2 years ago? The guy throws for just over 3,000 yards, runs for an additional, I believe, 260 yards on the ground with 4 touchdowns, 13 through the air, 17 total, and 7 interceptions. Are we seeing an improvement on those numbers this year with Jacoby Brissett? I mean, he's been in the system now a couple extra years, been able to sit back, kind of learn a few things. Do you have any expectations for Jacoby Brissett?
Jacoby Brissett is going to be a very, very, very low end, probably one of the last quarterbacks taken in drafts. Granted, he's got a lot better offensive line. He's got a lot better weapons all around him than he had 2 years ago. I'm still, I better get, if I'm taking 3 quarterbacks, which good and well that I'm prone to do, that might be a guy that I want to go out there and try to get. But overall, I'm not really going to be going after drafts.
Yeah, he's currently, I've moved him up to 25th on my quarterback board, right behind Nick Foles and Matt Stafford. So I'm not really viewing Jacoby Brissett as a guy that I'm really looking to grab in drafts heading into the season right now. He's playing behind one of the best offensive lines in football, which is kind of a boost for his value. But that's going to be put to the test this year, because I think if you look at their numbers over the past couple of years, Jacoby Brissett on his dropbacks to the time that he actually gets the ball out of hand, releases at about 3 seconds, where I believe Andrew Luck last year was just a hair over 2 seconds. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot, but that definitely helps the pass blocking for an offensive line to get that extra second to keep guys from getting into the backfield. So he has that long release like we used to see with like a Byron Leftwich, and it's going to lead to some sacks, going to lead to some quarterback hits. That's really going to affect his numbers as well as the rest of the guys in this offense. One of them being Marlon Mack. And how are you viewing Marlon Mack after this injury news or after the retirement with Luck? Now with Brissett as the quarterback, how far have you dropped him down your board?
He's dropped down about 5 or 6 slots for me. He was going in the mid to late teens for me. I mean, he's dropped now down to 21st on my board. You got to be looking at a lot more stacked boxes there.
Yep.
It is, again, all around this Colts offense, it is not looking good. The tight ends, the running backs, the wide receivers, everybody is taking a notch down.
Do you see it though? Is that it's going to be a buying opportunity that guys like T.Y. Hilton are going to fall so far down the board, or Marlon Mack's going to fall so far down the board that you can't ignore the value?
Again, just like T.Y. Hilton, I'm not going to be comfortable taking him in round 2, round 3, really round 4. The value. It's great getting value, but the guy's still got to produce, and I don't see these guys having
not at least on a consistent enough basis. That's for sure. No, and that's the way I'm looking at it right now. I've got Marlon Mack. I've already drafted him, I believe, in 3 different leagues before the retirement news hit. So, of course, I'm kind of taking it a little bit with a grain of salt right now, and I want to see what this offense is going to look like with Brissett at the helm. But I'm not excited like I was a week ago, having Marlon Mack as my RB2 or RB3, depending on how some of these drafts unfolded for me. So, kind of taking one on the chin there, like some of the other guys did. We had several people that were stricken with bad luck, but great little pun there that I just used. I don't know if you're I don't know if you're buying into that, but oh well.
You do have the worst luck in fantasy football.
That's true. I am the unluckiest man in fantasy football. We're going to dub that hashtag throughout this season, so be on the lookout for that on the Twitter account at Roto Superstar. But that's the not the only bad news that we received over the weekend.
That's good news,
Brandon. Well, we'll get to that here in just a second. But Lamar Miller, probably within 30 minutes after I left the draft that we had on Saturday, breaking news, Lamar Miller was carted off the field. Of course, you never want to hear that a player's carted off the field in a preseason game. It's usually a bad sign, not a great indication. Of course, later on we find out torn ACL, Lamar Miller gone for the year, probably done as a Texan now. You won't see him on this roster next year at all. Now this backfield is up for grabs. And of course, we have the newly acquired Duke Johnson setting up possibly nicely in this backfield to produce some fantasy numbers for some people. But of course, you've got the guys back behind him as well. You've got the Demaria Crockett's of the world, the Karen Higdons of the world, the undrafted rookies that they brought in after the NFL draft. Higdon's getting a lot of play over the last couple of weeks in preseason action, so they're kind of wanting to see what they've got out of him. They've been high on Crockett all offseason long, so I wouldn't be shocked to see him get a little bit of run. But also, I'm not going to count out the fact that they're going to bring in a running back that is cut, a veteran that is cut from a team over the course of the next few days. I'm not going to be shocked to see that. But, of course, Nick Heffley here does get Duke Johnson in our auction draft for $1 at the very end of the draft. So now he is wearing rose-colored glasses when it comes to the perception of Duke Johnson's fantasy value in 2019. Take it away. Let's hear the love fest for Duke Johnson. Let me hear it.
2 weeks ago, I'm drafting Duke Johnson.
No, okay. So, here we go.
Yeah. Go back to my SBFFC. Go back. SBFFC. Main event. Duke Johnson. Round 7. That's how much I like Duke Johnson. I personally was pissed off that he got traded off from the Browns so early. He was easily going for me in some of the mocks I was doing around 12, 13. And I was able to get him then before they, had all this stuff where they're going to trade him off. Big fan of Duke Johnson. In a PPR league, I don't know how you can't be a fan. He is not going to get all the carries there. He's not going to be having 100% target share, but he's gone from now probably being more like he's field for, I don't know, 40% of the snaps where, Lamar Miller's probably having close to that 60%, especially, I think they've been talking that they're going to put Duke Johnson out wide. But for me, I think Duke Johnson has to take a PPR darling. He's going to get a lot of work in this offense here for an offensive power pack system where, just like we're talking about the Colts, the Colts are going to stack the box, and Marlon Mack is going to be jumbled up with 8-man, 9-man fronts. Duke Johnson's going to have a lot of lanes and get a lot of dump offs here. So I am loving Duke Johnson. We did a draft earlier tonight, 12-team league, Duke Johnson this round. I think it's where his value is going to be, especially the PPR.
I mean, I am seeing Duke Johnson go awfully high in that 5th, 6th round area right now, and that's that seems to be everyone's getting excited. They're wanting to jump into Duke Johnson land. But ask yourself, are you drafting Lamar Miller in the 5th round? Are you drafting Lamar Miller in the 6th round in any of these drafts prior to the injury?
You're not, but maybe you should. I mean, Lamar Miller before. I mean, go back and look at Lamar Miller's numbers. I mean, he was a really good fantasy running back last year.
He was very meh. He's very meh as a fantasy running back.
He is meh, but where did he finish last year overall running back?
He finished as a low-end RB2.
Okay. If I got that kind of production out of Duke Johnson, if he drafted later on in some drafts, I'm not necessarily happy. But I mean, Duke Johnson. I mean, Lamar Miller is the kind of guy who is in a good offense. A little older, but it's one of those situations, at least for me, with a guy like Duke Johnson, he has a lot of potential. I mean, for me, it's always been one of those things. Give Duke Johnson a chance, especially with his PPR ability. Just give the man a chance. I think with this chance, he is going to take it.
Well, I'll say this: that's the Texans, from what I've noted, what you've seen over the course of the last few years, they don't typically throw the ball out of the backfield to the running back at a high rate. Now just 2 years ago, Duke Johnson finished the season with 74 receptions and was the number 11, I believe, running back in PPR formats in fantasy. Some numbers that I kind of dove into last night. I wrote an article for rotoballer.com about Duke Johnson. Some things I did kind of find out that were a little bit positive, that are skewed to Duke Johnson. Positive numbers that's going to support Duke Johnson as a fantasy running back. And I'll kind of throw those out here right now. Over the last 3 years, Duke Johnson is 2nd in yards per touch in fantasy football. He's also 2nd in percentage of carries of gains of 10-plus yards, 4th in yards per route run, and then 9th in rush success from the shotgun, which Houston runs from the shotgun the 4th highest amount in the league. So that's some positive scripts for Duke Johnson as we head into the season. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Duke Johnson can be a great value play if you drafted him late enough in drafts heading into the season. But this is the NFL, and this is also the point that I've made with Nick over the last couple of days since we've had this draft, is don't fly over the moon for Duke Johnson just because Lamar and Miller went down with the injury. You know how the NFL works. They will bring in a veteran running back. I would put my paycheck on the line that they do.
I would too.
But that does not mean that Duke Johnson's going to be the guy that's getting the majority of the workload here.
I will bet you he gets over 50% of the workload. I don't care who they bring in.
I believe that they're going to view him, and that's the thing too. Like if you look at his statistics as a rusher, the most that he's ever had in a year was his rookie season, and that was 104 rushes. He's combined for 122 the last 2 seasons.
They've always had somebody in front of him, Brandon. They've always had Carlos Hyde.
Who could be the guy that they bring in Houston?
Could be the guy, and just like in Cleveland, Carlos Hyde's not a good running back. We've seen it.
I mean, Carlos Hyde is not a great running back. I mean, there's odds that they're going to bring in LaShawn McCoy. That's who I think is the favorite right now. If I were to put my money on it, would be LaShawn McCoy which is a danger to Duke Johnson because we have known LaShawn McCoy to be a great PPR running back. He can catch the ball out of the backfield.
That is correct. That would be a bad move. But the good move on that, at least for my fantasy team, I know yours the exact same way, is I've also got Devin Singletary for Virginia every week too. So
I mean, who has been one of the biggest proponents of Devin Singletary over the course of the last couple of months? This guy right here.
You and I are unfortunately both on the Devin.
Yes, and I've been also on Justice Hill, and you're hopefully starting to slowly come around on the Justice Hill train.
Yeah,
maybe a little bit. We'll see how that works out. But back to this. Back to Duke Johnson. I mean, I'm not going to fault you for the excitement for Duke Johnson. I think that there is some excitement to be had with him as a running back. There should be, and I just pointed out numbers that are positives for him that they could utilize Duke Johnson in this offense. But it's also a case of how does his style of play fit into what the Texans like to do with their running backs in this offense? It might be a little bit of oil and water for the first part of the year, and that's what I think that they're going to wind up having to utilize Duke Johnson's strengths in a different way than what they've done with running backs in the past. And who knows how that works out early on in the year. So that might be a situation where, he starts off a little bit slow. You've got these guys that have bought in on Duke Johnson, drafting him in the 5th, 6th round, and then get disappointed early on. And it's a perfect buying opportunity for later on in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. The draft we did tonight, 5th round, is, it's definitely not as good value as I would see. I actually kind of going Dave Montgomery in my draft tonight. A couple of picks for
Homer pick.
Available in the 5th round. I'm going there every day.
David Montgomery, Homer pick right here.
Yeah.
Woo! That's right. Woo! Ric Flair says it.
No, Duke Johnson for me. He's a guy that if he had lasted back into that 6th round, I was fully prepared for that. I think over the course of the next few days and weeks, as we head into the early part of the season, I'm going to dub Duke Johnson. We're going to rename him. We're going to rename him Woo Johnson. We're going to rename him Woo Johnson as we get ready to Woo Johnson. That's right. We're going to get ready for this Texans running game to take off in week 1. Duke Johnson goes for a sound 4 carries for 13 yards, 5 catches out of the backfield for 57 yards and a touchdown. And we're going to go, Woo Johnson. I cannot deal with this over the moon excitement for Duke Johnson right now when we haven't even seen how the final Texans running back depth charts is going to shake out and how it's going to look. That's my thing with Duke Johnson. What have I always told you when it comes to running back? This is the reason I don't like Justice Hill as much as I like Duke Johnson or Devin Singletary. One word: opportunity. And guess what? Knocking right on Woo Johnson's head right now.
It's definitely knocking on his head. But will he step through the door when opportunity is knocking? That remains to be seen.
That does remain to be seen. But guess what? He has shown in the past he is a PPR darling. The man's going to catch balls. Again, where I've gotten him in the past, this is like a lottery ticket. I've been getting him. I got him around 7, so I really like the guy. But I've got a couple drafts where I've gotten him in, the 9th, 5th round. It's a lottery ticket for me. Something to hit already before the year starts. You prepare for that. That's golden. So hopefully you are like me, and hopefully you listen to the podcast enough to know. And it's for my life with Duke Johnson guys too, and feeling the same excitement we are for
Woo Johnson. That's right. It's another little tidbit of injury news that's kind of come down the pike today. It's not really that it's a big concern for fantasy owners much out there. But Jerick McKinnon has a setback with his knee, the surgically repaired knee. Likelihood is that he's going to be placed on the IR with the 49ers, which really solidifies Tevin Coleman as the lead running back for the 49ers offense. but also opens the door for Mr. Beat Me Down Matt Breida to come into the backfield and vulture away some carries from my guy, Tevin Coleman. I know there's a lot of excitement out there that people think Matt Breida is going to just step in and just take the job away from Tevin Coleman. I still do not think that that's going to be the case here. I think we're going to see a great year from Tevin Coleman with the 49ers, but McKinnon to the IR possibly. How are you viewing? I know we'll talk about it more next week or on the next podcast when we talk about the NFC West, but how are you looking at the backfield now of Coleman, Breida?
For you've been talking about this situation for a year plus about what's going to happen. I am in direct line of thinking. It's going to be a Tevin Coleman kind of backfield. I think we're going to see about a 70-30 kind of a split between him and Breida. Breida's still going to touch the ball. Let's get that right. I think you're still going to see some Jeff Wilson in this offense too. I mean, I think
I don't even know if it's going to be Jeff Wilson more than it's going to be Raheem Mostert.
I disagree.
I think Mostert's the guy.
Really good game.
So did Mostert, though. That's the thing. They brought in any running back they'd put in that backfield, had a spurt, and had one or two games that were really, really good.
Yeah, I don't think it's really going to matter. But so taking a look at these guys, I mean, I think the guy that I want to own definitely is Tevin Coleman.
Yeah.
Seems to be, for me, just seems to be going in that range where I just never seem to be able to grab him. But Jerick McKinnon is somebody I have no ideas about even trying to grab him.
No want or need to even attempt to draft Jerick McKinnon. I mean, going back to even last year's podcast when we first started this thing up, I mean, as soon as Jerick McKinnon was signed, I put it on paper and wrote an article when I was back with Roto Experts that Tevin Coleman was going to be the running back for the 49ers within a year. Bingo. I hit that one right on the head. And now I think we're bongo. Yeah, we're in store for a big year from Tevin Coleman, and I think that's going to be the case in 2019. Do not be shocked to see that guy finish as like the mid-tier RB2 in this offense. I mean, he's done it before with Kyle Shanahan, and I think he's on the verge of being able to do it again. But checking into our weekly checkups on the holdouts, there's really not been any change with Melvin Gordon. There was some scuttlebutt on Twitter earlier today that some writer put out that he expects Melvin Gordon to be back for week 1, but that holds about as much grain of salt as me saying that I think he's going to be back in week 6. I have no justification on that. That's just me saying words, just like that writer did and put out today. I'm not even sure if the guy put his name to it. It's all it was rumor and innuendo. But Gordon, we're still avoiding him at this point in time, correct?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he just has that. You just kind of feel it that Gordon's going to be holding out.
Yeah. At least week 8. And I mean, that seems to be the case that he has to be back by week 8 to get that year of free agency eligibility. So I would not be shocked to see him sit out until week 8. So for me, that's just a hard pass on him right now.
Yeah, still absolutely.
And then, of course, Ezekiel Elliott, we're still holding out hope as Cowboy fans that week 1, he walks through the door. You got Jerry Jones coming out today on 103.5 or 105.3 The Fan in Dallas that he was asked about what's the situation with Zeke, any new updates or anything like that. Of course, his words, you can find them on Twitter. There's quotes out there everywhere. That was last weekend. No, this week he has another boneheaded comment talking about it's a marathon. We don't need Zeke until the playoffs. We don't really have to have him for the dog days of the NFL season. As long as he's here and ready to compete and take us through the playoffs, that's when we need him. Idiotic comment by Jerry Jones. It's at this point, just shut up. Let Zeke sign the contract. Let him come in and play. But until I see him on the field, who knows what's going to happen. Right now, I almost think we're in store for an Aaron Donald situation that we had from just a couple of years ago. Yeah, Aaron Donald sat out week 1 or actually, no, he came back like on the eve of week 1, was inactive for the first game of the season, but was back in week 2. I think that's probably going to be the scenario we see with Ezekiel Elliott at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see his holdout lasting too much longer. I mean, they've offered him to be the second highest paid running back in the league. Zeke, take it, buddy. I drafted Zeke. The draft we had tonight, I had the 8th pick. I drafted Zeke and was running up to the board to be able to get him. So.
Yeah, I mean, like what you said, you got him at the 8th spot tonight. In that main event in the SBFFC that we had just a couple weeks ago, the guy at 8 just took him right in front of me, where I had the 9th pick, and I would have been dancing had I got him at the 9th pick. But if that's going to be the case and he misses week 1, obviously Tony Pollard is going to be a hot commodity, especially in DFS circles and on FanDuel in week 1. He's going to be a low minimum price. You can get him for next to nothing, but he's also going to be one of the higher options on the board as far as ownership wise. Tony Pollard likely going to have a big game against the Giants defense. It's just atrocious currently. So, I mean, you're seeing him. You mentioned tonight Tony Pollard went in round 7 in your draft that you did this evening? So, yeah, I mean, we're back in that James Conner territory from last year with Le'Veon Bell's holdout situation. You're seeing the backup start to rise up the draft board and getting to a point to where it's just too much of a reach to grab him if you have Ezekiel Elliott as your first round running back. So, but it's almost you're handcuffing yourself, putting yourself in a position where you have to have Tony Pollard at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, still, again, my draft ad tonight when I had Ezekiel Elliott, I think you got to be in or out. If Tony Pollard is lasting a little bit later, I think you definitely got to get him. I'm all about getting the handcuff to my back. That's way too early, especially when I think Ezekiel Elliott's going to play 14, 15 games.
Yep.
Way too much to get a guy who might play.
All right, so moving on to the fantasy preview for the NFC South. One of the more higher scoring divisions in football. Little bit of defense to be played in this division, but otherwise it's a very fantasy friendly division. A lot of players that get drafted, a lot of points scored out of this division here. We're going to start off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Out with Dirk Cutter, out with Ryan Fitzpatrick, in with Bruce Arians, and in again with Jameis Winston. There's some excitement with Bruce Arians at the helm of the Buccaneers this year. A lot of people are kind of buying into Jameis Winston. Do you think that he can return value as a quarterback 1 in fantasy this year?
I do. I am all aboard the Jameis Winston hype train this year. Give me some crab legs, dude.
Take him and run.
You got a guy in Bruce Arians that came in and he, for lack of a better term, pretty much said he was handpicking this situation for Jameis Winston. He's always said that Jameis Winston is the perfect fit for his offense there. So I am buying in. The draft I did tonight actually got Jameis as my backup quarterback. So I have gotten Jameis as my backup in pretty much every league that I've done that I've had a chance at a reasonable spot to be able to. So I think he has got potential for a huge year. You're looking at 2 top 25 wide receivers, top 5 tight end. You've got running backs who are going to have a chance to catch the ball. You got a backup tight end in Brady who Jameis Winston was.
Yep.
You're going to be throwing the ball. The run game is not that great. I look for Jameis Winston to easily have a return of a top 12 season quarterback.
Yeah, I was going to kind of put a projection on Jameis Winston at 4,500 passing yards and 30 touchdowns. Do you think that he can exceed both of those or over under on either one?
Boy, I hope so. No, I think you go back to his 1 year that he started all 16 games in 2016. He threw for just shy of 4,100 yards and 28 touchdowns.
And that was with Dirk Cutter and a very stale vanilla offense.
You're going to Bruce Arians, who is a high-flying offense with a lot of weapons.
Lot of plays to be made on that one.
I think that actually I going to go for about 33 touchdowns with maybe 1 or 2 on the ground. So 35 total touchdowns. I think that's where James is going to be finishing.
Yeah, and that's easily going to be QB1 in fantasy in 2019. So you did mention the two receivers. Of course, we got Mike Evans. He's solidly inside the top 10 at the wide receiver position. I don't think we can even debate the fact that he's going to be in store for another good season in 2019. But let's talk about Mr. Hype Train himself, Chris Godwin. He's a guy that I've written about in the past, as far as kind of telling some people to kind of pump the brakes just a little bit with Chris Godwin. He had a lot of up and down games in 2018, but by season's end, his numbers at the end of the year looked a lot better based on the big outburst of games that he did have. So you kind of forget about the duds that he would kind of provide you on a given week. Are you buying into the Chris Godwin hype, or are you kind of laying back in the weeds and kind of seeing how things unfold with him early on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you really lay back in the weeds for Chris Godwin. He went in a draft that I did together in the 3rd round. Like, Chris Godwin's a good receiver, and I understand where everybody's coming from this offense. Humphreys is gone. Sean Jackson's gone. They think, man, that's a lot of targets to be able to go around for a guy like Chris Godwin. I don't think he's going to return that much value. I think he's going to receive with him getting hyped up way too much. I mean, he's going in front of guys at this point right now, like Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, Mike Williams, Kenny Galladay, some of the guys some of the boards that I'm seeing right there. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, he's currently at 18 wide receiver in ADP, 44 overall. He's going ahead of Kenny Galladay, Tyler Lockett, Cooper Kupp, and Tyler Boyd. All guys, I mean, I'll say this, all three of Galladay, Lockett, and Kupp, I do have ahead of Chris Godwin. Godwin, I think I've got around at about 21 or so in my rankings currently. Let me look that up just real quick. Godwin, no, I do have him at 18 currently, just one spot ahead of Cooper Kupp. So
I'm a little later on.
So yeah, I think more of it than anything is the fact that there's so much expectation for this offense to take off this year. It's kind of the same situation we keep kind of going back and touching base on, with how the Chiefs were last year, how bad that defense was, and the fact that the offense really had to step it up and perform. I think you're going to see that with the Buccaneers this year. I don't expect a lot out of that defense. It seems like they're going to be kind of a sieve to give up points. So Jameis Winston and the offense are going to have to light up the scoreboard to keep pace.
Yep. No, I think they're going to be out to the line again. I think it's going to be a lot of times throwing the crap out of the ball all the way down.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I do buy into Cooper. I do buy into Chris Godwin being a player you can get if the value's right, but I think this fact with him in drafts right now is you're seeing him go so high because of the hype through most of analysts and experts on Twitter. They're building him up so much that people are seeing his name, and they're seeing his name in neon lights right now, and it's just making people just grab and reach for Chris Godwin in drafts. So where I'm kind of saying, pause it a little bit, try to get him at the right value and don't reach for the guy. I think he's going to still – he's going to be up and down a little bit, especially early on in the season. But there's been a lot of talk that the fact that he's not going to come off the field there, he's going to play every snap on this offense, which that leads into, again, the big O opportunity. What Nick likes to point out, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for Chris Godwin to pile up some targets in this offense. So we'll see how that unfolds early on in the season. But the real question is going to be, how do we view this Buccaneers backfield? Peyton Barber, Ronald Jones, or another player who is starting to kind of get talked about over the course of the last few days?
You're referring to you're not referring
No. Let me see if I can pronounce this right. I'm going to throw it out there. It's Dare Ogunbowale is the name. Yes, exactly. No, there's been talk and almost some confirmation today that he's going to be in line for the third down back for this Buccaneers offense, which we know, of course, Bruce Arians likes to throw the ball to the running backs out of the backfield. So, how are you viewing this backfield for the Bucs? Are you just completely staying away, which I found myself doing in a lot of drafts over the course of the last couple of weeks? Or are you trying to get a guy at the right value?
So last year I was all on the Ronald Jones hype train. I was drafting him crazy early, but I was getting him early enough because I thought it was literally opportunity. I did get Peyton Barber some grass. So I was bought into this running back situation last year. Peyton Barber had a couple good games last year, especially toward the end of the year in playoff time. But I just Peyton Barber doesn't excite me whatsoever. He's going to be a guy.
Peyton, let's put it this way: Peyton Barber is the Lamar Miller of the NFC.
I was going to say he's more like, for me at least, on the height, he's like a Chris Carson. I don't think he's got that ability, obviously, with himself.
Wow, that's way like that's polar opposites for me. I'm high on Chris Carson. I'm nowhere near high on Peyton Barber.
No, well, I'm talking about more coming in, like going into last year.
Oh, okay.
He would be running back number one on the team, but you're like, I mean, they got this rookie coming in. I think I'm gonna go that route because the hype is around the rookie, right?
Yeah.
So Peyton Barber this year, I think it's much the same. Ronald Jones, the guy who his height would lead you to believe after a horrible year last year. Certainly Ronald Jones is post type superstar. I'm taking him this much. I'm taking him late because he's got that ability. I'm not saying he's going to do it. He's got the ability to finish as a top 3 running back. I don't see that potential at all whatsoever for a guy like Peyton Barber. So give me Ronald Jones the ability to finish higher, that opportunity. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, if you put a gun to my head and told me that I had to draft any of these running backs, I would probably be the guy that would be drafting Ronald Jones later. But then I would also be using that late round flyer on Ogbonwale late in drafts because it's the same thing, huh? But have I? No, not yet.
I've literally never seen him
draft. He's actually been kind of getting picked up in drafts over the last couple of days that I've seen. He's coming upboards a tad bit. People are starting to kind of read the press clippings and starting to kind of pick up on the guy late. I mean, it's like what you've mentioned earlier. It's a lottery ticket. You're drafting this guy in a 16th, 17th, 18th round. And if he turns into coming into and having like a Theo Riddick role as that pass catching specialist for its team, I mean, you could do worse for a guy that's your RB5, RB6 that you could potentially plug into your flex spot on a weekly basis. Yeah, I mean, I know you don't, but I'm just pointing out a name for the listeners on the podcast because that's what we do. We're not just going to talk about the stars here. We're also going to kind of talk about some scrubs and some guys to keep your eyes on. So
that's where it's more fun. Plugging these late round guys.
Exactly. That makes you feel smarter than the room. Dare Ogbonwale, I believe is how you pronounce it. We'll go with that. I mean, I've seen people that have struggled to say Jay Ajayi, and this is way, way tougher. So, any other tidbits we want to cover here? I mean, OJ Howard, he's being solidly drafted inside the top 5 at the tight ends. Obviously he should return top 5 tight end value, correct?
I've had this offense for the last couple of years. So there's some bit overbashing. Jameis Winston likes Cameron Brate. I don't know why, but he likes him some Cameron Brate. I like OJ Howard. I'm not as high on him as some other people. So again, I like Evan Ingram better. I like Hunter Henry better. I actually like Jared Cook better, and I'm even almost going to say I like Anthony Donald. So granted, he's not going that low, but that's my opinion. I don't think he will return as high a value, but I still have him in my general top 8.
There you go. So next up on tap, we'll go with the Carolina Panthers. A little bit of up and down with this offense as well. You got Cam Newton that's battled the shoulder injury throughout most of the offseason, but it seems to be kind of something that's kind of behind him now. And he started to kind of move up my rankings based on that. Now as a friend, kind of at fringe QB1, I think a healthy Cam Newton is a guy that is going to provide you enough passing and rushing that can give you RB or QB1 numbers by the end of the season. It's not always going to be sexy. It's not going to be a stuffing type of a day for him passing the ball, but he gets in the end zone, plain and simple. So Cam Newton, I know you've never been the biggest supporter of Cam Newton, but do you see him as a QB1 in 2019? I know I've not seen you draft him yet, but is there – nor do you plan to? Of course not. But would you suggest that if you couple him with another quarterback fairly early after, do you see that as a situation where you're kind of using Cam Newton as a matchup play quarterback, or is he your no doubt starter week in, week out?
No, I better not be drafting him as my number one. He is a backup quarterback at this point playing the matchup. Same thing with Jameis Winston. I mean, Jameis Winston is a guy who I think is going to return QB1 numbers. Cam's going to be, I mean, Cam has so up and down depending on the matchup and against him. His wide receiver core is a little more experienced than they have been, but he's got an Asian Greg Olsen that's tied in. McCaffrey does his thing at running back. We'll talk about the wide receivers here in a second. Cam Newton's just not a guy that is going to be a starter week in, week out. If I get Cam as my number one, I better get a quick backup at number two, or if I get another quarterback at number one. Cam Newton's not a bad backup. I've got Cam Newton ranked for me. It's probably a lot lower than most experts out there. I've got him ranked on my quarterback.
Woo, man, that's a little bit low for me. Nah, but we'll, like you said, we'll get into the wide receivers, and I'll touch on them real quick. DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel both are two wide receivers that are really being hyped up throughout this offseason and into the preseason. A lot is expected of those two to make a jump in 2019, especially DJ Moore, the sophomore season. A lot of people are expecting him to kind of really take that next step forward and start to develop as one of the better receivers in the NFL. So if you look at those two guys, Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore, and the hype surrounding them, if they obviously perform, then Cam Newton himself has to be a guy that is performing in his own right.
You would think so, right?
You would think. That's how I look at that.
Tell me why you got a team in Minnesota with two top 10 wide receivers, and you got a quarterback in Kirk Cousins barely going inside the top 15.
That's because everybody has that perception with Kirk Cousins last year that he had a horrible year, but he finished as the 11th quarterback in fantasy and threw for 30 touchdowns.
I agree.
I mean, it's that all it is a perception. And I think that's how we're looking at Cam Newton too, is that we see him, the every other year jinx with Cam Newton where he has an awful season, but he's also a guy that was pushing for, or he did have the MVP year, that Super Bowl run, didn't he?
He did. He's just one of those guys that's a little too up and down. Again, you can still like and get wide receivers in an offense. Let's say each guy catches 6 to 8 touchdowns. That's only 14 touchdowns. Even if he has 3 or 4 go to a tight end, 3 or 4 go to Christian McCaffrey, it's still low 20s. I mean, that's not amazing QB1 type of numbers. So let's talk about these wide receivers. DJ Moore is a guy that, going into the year, I was big on DJ Moore. And then he got hyped. And then I didn't really like DJ Moore as much as where he was going.
It's because his value started getting a little bit too rich for your blood, correct?
Very much so. And the guy that, if you look at the numbers a little bit more, and the guy that I want to, I still have unfortunately not found myself there, is Curtis Samuel. 13 games last year, grand total of 7 touchdowns, whereas DJ Moore played in all 16 games and only scored 2. I think the value and the return is going to be a lot better there with Curtis Samuel, especially with his high.
Well, Samuel seems to have more of a rapport with Cam Newton too, and it's something that clicked at the tail end of the 2018 season, and seems to be the case still in preseason and practices. Is that they're really they're connecting a lot from everything that I've seen. So for me, I agree. I think the value lies with Curtis Samuel. but I think both receivers are going to be in store for really good years this year. Yeah, you agree? I would say.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd much rather have Curtis Samuel at this point.
Yeah,
Draft and how it's going. I mean, I think they're going to finish with very similar numbers. Again,
but you're paying less of draft capital for Curtis Samuel than you are for DJ Moore.
Correct, 100%.
Yeah.
Let me tell you who I am not paying for this year. The former Heifer fantasy favorite who I am not touching. I am not getting anywhere near. That is former Chicago Bear Greg Olsen. I am not.
Which I was shocked to see him come back this year. That was the thing. Like there's a couple games where he broadcasted last year. Broadcasted from the sideline in NFL games, and it seemed like that was his next step in progression. He did an excellent job as a broadcaster, and I'm just shocked to see him kind of come back and decide to take another year of hits here. So, like, if it's me, I'm going to take the stab. If I'm deep enough in a draft and I'm taking that much of a deep dive at the position, I'm going to draft Ian Thomas late.
And again, I think Ian Thomas, yeah, exactly. If I'm going for guy, I think that in a dynasty league, and we've talked about this, if I had a dynasty league with a tight end position, Ian Thomas is a great way.
Yeah, I agree. I'm all for that. So, just to kind of put the wrap on the Carolina Panthers here, Christian McCaffrey, number 1, number 2 pick for you.
At this point, he'd probably he'd be number 3. If it's me, granted, if you don't have this Ezekiel Elliott in there, for me, my top guys, I am probably going Kamara at this point 1. That's right.
Ooh.
Saquon Barkley 2, and Christian McCaffrey probably number 3.
All right. Again,
I've maintained that since the beginning. I'm not changing that at this point right
now. Do you see Christian McCaffrey as a guy that could finish back-to-back seasons as the number 1 running back in fantasy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't think he's got 107 receptions from last year, 13 total touchdowns. He had a great year, as I predicted last year.
Match, exceed, or under those numbers from last year?
I'm going to go under. Not by much. I think 13 touchdowns, and what is that? So, like 1,900 yards. I think he's going to finish with more like a 16 to 1,700 yard season with 10 to 12 touchdowns or so. I think it's going to.
There you go. I like that call there. I think that's you can, we mentioned it over and over again here on the show too, is like this top 3, top 4 at the running back position. You're really splitting hairs between who's the top guy and who's the 4th guy. I mean, they're all great running backs. They're all going to be solid options as your RB1 if you're at that top end of your draft. So can't go wrong with Christian McCaffrey. And then that we'll put a bow on the Panthers there with Christian McCaffrey. We'll go on to the local team for Mr. Heffley here, and that is the Atlanta Falcons. Just an absolute barn burner of an offense last year for the Atlanta Falcons. Matt Ryan was the number 2 fantasy quarterback last year. Julio Jones finally decided to start catching touchdowns, which surprised many fantasy owners. And then you got Calvin Ridley coming out of nowhere for a double-digit touchdown season in his rookie year. The passing offense is there. We know that. So Matt Ryan, again this year, do you see him as a guy that's going to finish again in the top 5 at the position?
I do, yes. I've got him actually ranked as my number 5 quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, this kind of passing offense he's got everywhere. 3 really good receivers, a top 12 tight end, a guy who I have ranked in Devontae Freeman, very high running back. They've got the kind of offense that's
there you go. Julio Jones, fringe wide receiver at the tail end of the first round or even into the second round. Where are you comfortable drafting Julio Jones right now? And where do you see him finishing amongst the top 5 of the position?
Comfortable drafting? I'm comfortable going 10th overall. I think would be the earliest I would draft it. 1,600 yards, 113 receptions. Finally got some touchdowns, although it didn't look like it was going to be that way at the beginning of last year. 8 total touchdowns. He had some really good games for this year. Look at his games too. I know a couple of leagues that we were in, they were for over 100-yard games. He had 10 100-yard games last year. Huge numbers. So
yeah,
completely fine drafting him. He is one of the guys who I think is virtually bust-proof. Whereas a guy like I think Michael Thomas could at least have a little bust potential. A guy like Juju could have at least a little bust potential. Julio, I have no worries that he is at all.
Are you concerned about the foot injury already lingering for Julio Jones, but even before the season starts?
Nah, not worried about it whatsoever.
That would probably cause me a little bit of concern if I was drafting and took him in like that right at the end of the first round. We've seen it before with Julio. He's played through a foot injury, but it's also affected his play too. So that's kind of something to keep an eye on as we get near week 1. That is just a week away. He'll likely be a guy that you'll see already on the injury report questionable to play for week 1. I would almost be willing to bet when that first injury report comes out on Wednesday of next week, Julio Jones will be a questionable on that first injury report. Nah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that, with his injury status, he may miss a week, but he's that kind of guy that's going to play through.
And so Calvin Ridley, how high are you on Calvin Ridley? Obviously, the touchdowns are going to regress. We don't think he's going to go for double-digit scores again this year. We're correct.
Yeah, I think his reception is going to go up, yards is going to go up a little bit. I think touchdowns are going to come down. So overall, he's going to finish pretty close to where he finished last year. So I've got him ranked right now at 24. So, ahead of a guy like Chris Godwin.
Ahead of Chris Godwin, huh?
Ahead of Chris Godwin, absolutely.
I've got him at 23 myself, one spot ahead of DJ Moore. So that just by kind of relation between those two, that's where I'm looking at with them. DJ Moore, the de facto number 1 receiver for the Carolina Panthers, where I've got Calvin Ridley, the number 2 in a more high-octane passing attack for the Atlanta Falcons. I've got it 23 currently. So I do like Calvin Ridley, but the growing pains are going to be there. Same as last year, you're just going to get those up and down inconsistent weeks out of Calvin Ridley. You're going to have him pop for 2 touchdowns one week, and then you might go 2 to 3 weeks without him scoring another touchdown. So it's going to come and go with Calvin Ridley, and you're going to have to ride through the tough times to enjoy the good times with him as your fantasy wide receiver 2 or 3, depending on how you draft. But Austin Hooper, any interest there at the tight end position? He seemed to be kind of a guy that was just steady last year, not too exciting, but could still get the job done for you as a tight end 1. Do you think he's going to rise up the board anymore in 2019?
I don't. I think there's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense there, especially with Devontae Green coming back and being fully healthy. He's going to get some receptions out of the backfield here. So I personally, I don't view Austin Hooper as a starting tight end. He's a pretty good backup tight end. I had him as my backup in a couple weeks last year when he had the matchup. It was a good play, but I do not want him starting week in
I think I've been in a position I've drafted Austin Hooper as a tight end 1 so far in draft season. I've been okay with it, but it was also something too where it's just once you get through that top section of the tight ends, he's another guy that's just a very hodgepodge guy. You could draft him, you could draft Delaney Walker, you could draft some of these other guys, and they're all going to probably provide about the same amount of consistency week in and week out. So, I mean, I'm okay with Austin Hooper. You're probably going to be getting him later in drafts, and if you wait long enough as it is anyways, Austin Hooper is going to be a guy that's going to wind up on your roster more likely than not. Do you want Austin Hooper or do you want Jordan Reed at this point in time?
I want Delaney Walker.
I mean, there's some excitement there with Delaney Walker. I'll give you that.
There should be. Yeah. If there's one guy Marcus Mariota throws the ball to, it's going to be Delaney Walker. But your question was more Jordan Reed or Austin?
Yes.
Give me Jordan Reed. Because Jordan Reed is probably the top passing option in that offense, at least at this rate. I don't see any other receivers that I'd rather have over Jordan Reed. Whereas Hooper's got 3 or 4 guys that are going to be carries that are as good and better than Austin Hooper.
Okay, so let's look at my rankings. I've got Austin Hooper at 12 right now, 1 spot behind Mark Andrews, 2 spots behind Delaney Walker, 1 spot ahead of Eric Ebron, and 2 spots ahead of Jack Doyle, Kyle Rudolph. Are you taking Eric Ebron over Austin Hooper?
Yeah.
Even with the Brissett news?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, you said Ebron? Sorry, I thought you said Jordan Reed.
No, I'm going through my rankings right now. See, Eric Ebron, Jack Doyle, Kyle Rudolph.
Between those guys?
Yes. I mean, that's what we're looking at here.
Give me Ebron just for the touchdown abilities there. I'll take Ebron in that scenario. Jack Doyle, I've got ranked pretty low, actually. So I do not think Jack Doyle is going to be, for me.
That's probably an adjustment that I'll probably make before the season starts out, because I don't think Brissett's going to be the type of quarterback that's going to utilize the tight end as much as Andrew Luck would have, and Jack Doyle had that connection with Andrew Luck, so that's going to be an adjustment that I'll likely make. So at this point in time, you've got Austin Hooper. I've got him as that last tight end 1 in my rankings. Do you forego the position and then reach for one of the sleeper guys, TJ Hawkinson, Darren Waller, Dallas Goedert?
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather, if I'm going to get a guy, I'm going to get like Dallas Goedert as far as that goes. I mean, again, Hooper got ranked right there. I just want another tight end to be able to go with. I don't want him as my number 1. I want him as a very high end number 2.
There you go. Now we'll kind of switch gears real quick. We'll jump into the backfield for the Atlanta Falcons. Devontae Freeman, finally healthy coming into the year, does not have Tevin Coleman looking over his shoulders. The Atlanta Falcons made improvements along the offensive line via the NFL draft. Are we buying Devontae Freeman as a guy that can return back to RB1 that he was just a few seasons ago? Or are we expecting another kind of a dud season from Devontae Freeman due to missed time from injuries or anything like that?
He has been very much hurt the last couple of years.
Yes, he has.
But when he's healthy, he's shown that he's one of the more elite PPR running backs in the league. I've been a huge proponent of him ever since his second year in the league. Draft him right in that Duke Johnson kind of a range in round 7, round 8 back a couple of years ago. Ito Smith, I do like. I do like as a handcuff as I think Ito Smith's going to take the job. So the line is there and healthy. I think the Falcons are going to be a great team this year. Devontae Freeman, I got him as my number 2 running back in the 3rd round of the SFC. I think he's going to have a great year.
Devontae Freeman or Leonard Fournette? Devontae Freeman or Josh Jacobs? Devontae Freeman or Joe Mixon? Yeah, I've got Joe Mixon. I've got Leonard Fournette both in front of Devontae Freeman right now. I actually do have Josh Jacobs 1 spot ahead of Devontae Freeman currently. That's more me taking a thought process of the fact that 1 solid hit and Devontae Freeman's down for 2 weeks. So that's how I'm kind of looking at that with my projection, my ranking for Devontae Freeman right now. I'm a big proponent of Devontae Freeman. I think he has the upside to finish as an RB1. So if you can get him at a great value, like in that 15-16 spot at the position, I'm all for that. Jump all over that if you can in your drafts there at that point, because we all know, and we keep preaching it on this show, go get your running backs early and often, because they're flying off the board in drafts if you've not done one so far. And if you have done several like we have, that the running backs are coming off the board so quick, it makes your head spin. But last team in the division that we're going to go over is going to be the New Orleans Saints. And another year, we're looking at a high-powered offense. Alvin Kamara, no longer has Mark Ingram looking over his shoulders, but now he has Latavius Murray looking over his shoulders. Alvin Kamara is your top running back on your board. He is the number 3 running back on my board. Again, splitting hairs. I mean, we've talked about it till we're blue in the face ad nauseum. You're splitting hairs with these guys at the top of the board. So I don't really think we need to really discuss the value that Alvin Kamara can bring to your fantasy team. We know what he can do for you. Latavius Murray. Any upside for Latavius Murray this year? I've written about him a couple of times through the offseason so far. I see him as a candidate. He's going to get that Mark Ingram role. His immediate value is going to be tied into what he can do at the goal line. If he can score you enough touchdowns, the value is there. But are you really willing to risk the investment for Latavius Murray in the 7th, 8th round right now?
I'm not buying. I'd much rather have a guy like Johnson. I'd much rather take the upside on a guy like Devin Singletary or Caleb Ballage with Latavius Murray. Keep my fingers crossed he can get going. He's not going to get all the goal line. Kamara's going to get some goal line very soon. So, for me, I really do not. Again, it depends on the makeup of my team. If I get some rookies, maybe I want to get a veteran like Latavius Murray. But again, break down on where Latavius Murray's going so far. I do not want to touch it.
33 at the position. He's at 33 at the position, 81 overall in ADP currently. So, like I said, that 7th, 8th round is where we're going to see Latavius Murray being pulled off the board in drafts. He's going around the likes of, he's one spot behind your boy, Mr. Woo Johnson.
Right.
He's one spot behind Woo Johnson in ADP right now. He's also one spot ahead of the likes of Jordan Howard, and he's ahead of Darius Geis, Rashad Penny. Darius Geis, I'll give it to you. I think that's a guy that I would probably draft over Latavius Murray. But would you draft Jordan Howard, Rashad Penny over Latavius Murray currently?
I'd probably draft Latavius Murray or Jordan Howard. I'd probably rather have the upside of Rashad Penny.
There you go. Now with Drew Brees, the passing attack, he kind of had a down season last year. Wasn't the greatest year. He started to see a little bit of regression over the last couple of years. The passing yardage is starting to dip. Touchdowns went back up over 30 last year. But that was where we kind of saw a little bit of the running game kind of hit some walls during the season. They're wanting to run the ball in New Orleans and play a lot of defense. Do we see kind of Drew Brees being this guy that's just going to be that fringe QB1, or will we have the upside where the yardage spikes again, touchdowns spike again, and all of a sudden he's back up 5, 6, 7 in fantasy quarterback rankings?
I don't see it. I've got him ranked as my number. I believe I've got him as my number 17 quarterback.
Woo! That is the lowest I think I've seen him anywhere.
Hey, I'm okay. Trust you, me. Drew Brees is going to have his week, but he just his age 40 year. He doesn't have really the kind of weapons you expect to have for such a high tier guy. If he was getting drafted, he's still the number 6, 7, 8 guy.
Yeah.
He's not there.
Well, you're drafting it based on name recognition more than anything.
This is why, again, Tom Brady's down there, for a lot of people too. I mean, I have him one spot behind Tom Brady on my draft board. But again, I don't really like the weapons he has outside of Kamara, Michael Thomas, and again, we mentioned him earlier, Jared Cook.
Yep.
Jared Cook's going to have a really good year just because you've got the likes of Keith Kirkwood, Traquan Smith, and again, this offense. Those aren't necessarily names that jump out on.
Which you would think would inadvertently affect Michael Thomas's production. The lack of weapons around him. There's no true number 2 receiver in this offense. Everything's funneled through Michael Thomas, target-wise, reception-wise. Do you think that we're gonna see a dip in production with Michael Thomas this year?
I do not. Michael Thomas on my draft board right now is my number 3 wide receiver behind Devontae Adams and DeAndre Hopkins.
Any interest whatsoever behind Michael Thomas here? Any interest in drafting Traquan Smith, Ted Ginn Jr., Keith Kirkwood, any of those guys?
Not really. Traquan Smith would probably be the guy if I that I would want a little bit more than the rest of these guys.
And I think Sean Payton's expecting a little bit more out of Traquan Smith. He was really inconsistent last year. Do you think he sees a little bit of a step forward in the right direction this year?
Yeah, I think he's going to get. I mean, he's done. I think he only finished with 44 targets, 28 receptions last year. I think he's going to do 5 touchdowns. I mean, it's a good number. I think he's going to get a little bit more there, more like a 6 or 7 touchdown range. So he's going to have a decent year. Again, there's the other guys that I like. I like the more height around him a little bit more. But again, the guy, the other receiver I want on here, Jared Cook's going to have a really good.
Yeah, Cook. I see. I can't. I've not drafted him yet, and I can't seem to get him where I want to get him. He's going a little bit earlier than what I would like to see Jared Cook go in drafts. Just because I've been burned by New Orleans tight ends in the past. We saw it last year with Watson. Yeah, everybody was expecting a big year out of Ben Watson. He gets down there and he falls on his face. There was no connection between Drew Brees and Ben Watson last year. But it seems to be that there's a little bit of connection through preseason practices and things like that right now with those two. So let's see if that transforms into production in the regular season. And I think people are more buying into the hype with Jared Cook in that offense more than what we really are expecting to see with him in that offense so far. So I'm kind of on the fence with Jared Cook and what I expect for him as a New Orleans Saint this year.
Yeah, I think in terms of receivers, I think he's going to be, I think he's going to be easily the number 2 receiving option right behind Michael Thomas and Sauber. He is Jared Cook's a good receiver.
I agree. I mean, he has the talents. We've seen it. He performed well in Oakland last year. This is going to really be the best quarterback he's really played with through his time in the NFL. As far as the most consistent quarterback that he's played with, and a guy that actually does like to utilize the tight end position with Drew Brees. So that we'll see how that unfolds early on in the year. He's easily going to be a guy that's going to be your 6th, 7th, 8th tight end off the board in drafts. So I can get on board with that. I think that's about where his ceiling will be this year as well. So any other tidbits that we need to cover here with the Saints or anybody else in the division that we haven't mentioned yet?
No, I mean I think we've really touched. I tell you what, the one caveat I do want to throw out. If you are one of those people, which are you shouldn't be doing this a lot, but fantasy defenses, if you are gonna take a backup defense, second defense, and play the matchups week to week, definitely go take a look at the Falcons. Their defenses are all finally healthy.
Finally healthy this year, yep.
Yeah, Keanu Neal coming back, so they have got a really nice, latter half of the schedule championship weeks facing the Panthers, the Niners, and the Jags. Might be some good options, especially down the stretch. So definitely take a look at them if you're going to be selecting a backup defense out there. I don't think so. This might number 1 defense, but you're streaming and picking up defenses here and there. You got the space and want to add one. They're a really good pick for you to be able to add.
There you go. I can sign off on that myself. And any other last bit of information before we call it a night here on the podcast?
Yeah, man. Hey, you know what? Brandon and I have talked about it. But especially coming from me, do not worry where guys are going. If you don't like a guy like Steve Johnson, go out and go get him.
Yeah.
You know what? You got to go out and your team. Don't worry about the drafts and where these guys are going. Just because Steve Johnson, all of a sudden now start to go, in round 5, round 6. If you like him in round 5 and it's a little early, take him. If that's the guy you want, go after guys.
There you go. And where can they find you on Twitter, young sir?
Yeah, you can find me at the Real FF.
And I, of course, am at Roto Superstar on Twitter. Look for my Duke Johnson article coming out on rotoballer.com tomorrow. A lot of nice little tidbits of information and what I expect to see out of Duke Johnson as we enter into the 2019 season. I also want to thank FanDuel sponsorship on the show. 1 week away from FanDuel starting up. So if you haven't gotten your account set up or anybody else set up on FanDuel, Woo Fantasy is the promo code to go and download now for free extra cash to start your season. Of course, all thanks to Full Time Fantasy Podcast Network for having us on and bringing us to you on a weekly basis. And for myself and Nick Heffley, until we talk to you on the next podcast and talk a little bit of NFC West Fantasy Preview and getting you ready for Week 1, we will talk to you later on another episode of Woo Fantasy.